Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad you're joining us. My name is Terry Eichel, and I work with the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network, a faith-based environmental group in Connecticut. And we work with religious communities on environmental issues such as climate change, toxic pollution, and biodiversity loss. I'd like to open first with IREJN's Land Acknowledgement Statement. We acknowledge that Connecticut, Algonquin for land on the Tidal River, is the traditional home of Mohegans, Pequots, and many other tribes. We are grateful for our Native people's care for their home and will strive to preserve it for the next 7 generations. This evening, we are co-sponsoring this webinar along with the Greenwich Sustainability Committee, and are really grateful for their support and their participation. So for those of you who have ever gotten the chance to hear Mary Evelyn Tucker speak, she's amazing and she's over at Yale. She's one of my favorite people, and she once gave a talk that said, the Earth is facing 3 environmental crises at the same time: climate change, toxic pollution, and biodiversity loss. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we at IREGN, we really strive to educate and motivate people of faith and religious communities to take action on these 3 issues from a variety of perspectives. So tonight, we are tackling something that really touches on all 3: artificial turf. The plastics in artificial turf are made of fossil fuels. The chemicals used in artificial turf leach into the land. And of course, artificial turf damages habitat for wildlife, insects, and pollinators. So this evening, I'm very grateful to have 2 wonderful presenters with us tonight: Susan Rudolph from the Greenwich Sustainability Committee and Dr. John Trey Rogers from Michigan State University. Susan will give our first presentation on the dangers of artificial turf, and Dr. Rogers will follow with a presentation on the care of grass playing fields. After the presentations, we will have a moderated Q&A session, so please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A. I am recording this webinar. It will be available on our website, and I encourage you to forward the webinar to town officials who may be considering installing artificial turf. So again, thank you everyone for being here. I know Dr. Rogers is coming from an event that ended right at 7, so he'll probably be joining us a little bit later, but Susan is going to take over now and share her presentation with us. There she is. Hi, Susan.
Hello, good evening. So let me just get our
Thank you
share
so much for
screen.
being here, and I'll take my video off and I'll let you drive the bus.
All right, first things first, we're going to share our screen. Second, and we're almost there. Ta-da! I think we did it. First of all, thank you, Terry. Thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you to the Greenwich Sustainability Committee and to Interreligious Eco-Justice Network for sponsoring our webinar tonight. So I just want to start with a couple of preliminary notes. First, a reminder that research on this topic is robust, it's ongoing. And second, I'm very cautious about relying on marketing and sales materials. So I think a brief review of artificial turf will be a good way to begin. It's essentially a big plastic carpet with blades that are made to look like natural grass. The blades are normally manufactured from polyethylene, polypropylene, nylon, or some fossil fuel combination with multiple chemical additives, many of which are toxic. These can include phthalates, bisphenols, flame retardants, and PFAS. The blades are stitched to 1 or 2 of the backing, which are typically made of polyurethane. And then there's usually a latex or a urethane coating spread on the underside of that backing to secure the strands. And under that top layer, we find a shock pad. That's a cushion to give it some bounce. It's made from a stew. It can include rubber, thermoplastics, and then under this are various layers of gravel, irrigation pipes, sometimes even a weed repellent layer. Now, in between the blades, we find sand. that acts as a ballast to hold this very, very large and heavy plastic carpet down and to help eliminate the wrinkles. And then we find infill to support the blades to keep them separated. At one time, the most common infill was a mix of toxic styrene butadiene that's known as crumb rubber. It's made from old ground up vehicle tires. And studies indicate that waste tire material contains a variety of chemicals and metals, such as lead and cadmium. In fact, 96 of the 355 chemicals found in crumb rubber, were of concern to the International Agency for Research on Cancer. In addition to crumb rubber, now there are other materials, including silica sand that's coated in acrylic and organic infills such as corn husks, cork, engineered wood, walnut shells, just to name a few. In all cases, 4 to 5% of the infill migrates off each field annually, and so it has to be replaced. And regarding the plant-based infills, there is apprehension about the growing and the production methods. In addition, there's no chain of custody on these infills, and no long-term study has ever been conducted, and therefore we cannot assume these organic infills are benign. So I mentioned that artificial turf contains multiple chemical additives and metals, and I want to begin by focusing on chemicals called PFAS. That stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and I won't show off and say that like that anymore. They've been an active area of research, and they're hot topics in the news recently. These man-made chemicals, a little history lesson here, were first discovered around 1934 by I.G. Farben. That's a German chemical conglomerate. And then a few years later, a chemist at DuPont discovered what was named Teflon. And then in the late 40s, 3M discovered other compounds, including the one that we call Scotchgard. Now, essentially, PFAS makes products heat, water, stain, grease, and oil resistant. And the most familiar uses are the nonstick coatings, textiles, electric manufacturing, firefighting foam, and food packaging. Artificial turf contains PFAS, and it starts with the extrusion part of the manufacturing of the blades so that they don't stick or clog up the equipment, and to make the blades free of defects that are a little slippery and pliable. In fact, PFAS are found in the blades as well as the other layers and components that make up the artificial turf carpet. Dr. Graham Peasley at the University of North Carolina did extensive investigatory research about this. There are thousands of different members of the PFAS family tree, 12 to 16,000, depending on the literature one reads and when the material was written. What is indisputable, and due to new equipment and detection capabilities, is that PFAS are ubiquitous. They've been found in our water, in our air, in the soil, across the globe. And we'll look at the exposure to the environment and humans in just a second. So now that we know how and why PFAS got into the artificial turf, we're going to take a closer look at these chemicals. First of all, PFAS have a couple of nicknames, most commonly referred to as forever chemicals. And in order to understand why, and with apologies to those of you with a chemistry background, a 15-second chemistry lesson, I think, will add clarity, and I promise not to put you to sleep. So here's a member of the PFAS family tree. It's known as PFOA. It and all its relatives on that family tree are based on a carbon atom tail. Now, PFOA has 8 carbon atoms, and just as a little extra added tidbit, because it has more than 4 of them, it's known as a long-chain PFAS molecule. And attached to the carbon atoms are fluorine atoms. Now, fluorine has a nasty reputation. It's highly reactive, and it's a dangerous chemical. In fact, It's known as the chemist's killer due to so many lab accidents. And fluorine is one of the most electronegative elements in the periodic table. It's missing an electron in its outer shell. And fluorine really, really wants that electron. It's an addict. Carbon is willing and able to give up electrons. So carbon's an enabler in our little scenario. And that bond is called the strongest in organic chemistry. And that's what accounts for the indestructibility of the PFAS molecules. Now, as of July 8th, the EPA officially designated PFOA and PFOS, its cousin, as hazardous substances. Unfortunately, both continue to persist in the environment. Remember, they're called forever chemicals. And in addition, and this is key, manufacturers are replacing them with all their relatives on that family tree. But these substitutes are found to have similar or even worse health risks. They're called regrettable substitutes, which I think is a pretty apt name. Now, PFAS are also known as endocrine disrupting chemicals, and scientists and physicians are continually working on understanding how much PFAS people are exposed to and what's the impact on health. The research is costly, it takes a long time, especially because there are thousands of PFAS. At this time, some pretty prestigious institutions report that there are adverse health effects from PFAS. And as you can see here, the list is long and it's worrisome. It includes various types of cancer and extensive interference with reproduction. And recent research shows a linkage to increased testicular cancer and lower sperm count. Additionally, there's direct evidence of decreased vaccine response, which worries physicians. And at the same time, PFAS bioaccumulate. That means the body doesn't have enough capacity to rid itself of all the PFAS, and so they continue to build up. In fact, Dr. Sarah Evans at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital reports there's vulnerability starting with fetal development as well as with infants and children. Yet the symptoms may not show up for years. And as if that weren't enough, there's a problem of micro and nanoplastics. These are small bits of particles. They result from the breakdown of the artificial turf components. Microplastics are fragments about 5 millimeters, that's about the size of a pencil eraser, to not more than 1 micron, which is, or not less than 1 micron, which is 1/1000th of a millimeter. And nanoplastics are even smaller than 1 micron, and they're not visible to the human eye. Research showing the full extent of harm caused by microplastics and nanoplastics is ramping up fast. While there's a lot not yet known, what is known is concerning. And regarding synthetic turf fields, just one average field can lose up to 8% of its blades annually, and that yields over 3,200 pounds of plastic particle waste into our environment. And these tiny plastic bits act as a Trojan horse. Nanoparticles in particular have a large surface to volume ratio, and that enables them to transport toxins and pathogenic organisms. The mere presence of objects the size of nanoplastics is potentially disruptive because even if they might not be chemically dangerous, they're small enough to get into and to disrupt living cells. And one of the great concerns about artificial turf is that once the microplastics enter the soil, the air, the water, they become harmful to birds and animals and marine life. And eventually, microplastics end up in the human food chain. And once in the human body, micro and nanoplastics can cross those cell membrane barriers Kind of think of it as tiny, tiny bits of fine grains of sand and messing up a finely tuned engine. 4 months ago, there was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine that indicated microplastics are a potential risk factor in cardiovascular disease. And this is worrisome, so much so that the World Health Organization made an urgent call for more studies. So clearly, microplastics may be tiny, but they represent a less than tiny problem. And if you're interested in exploring this even further, there are a number of documentaries online about the topic, but the common message for all of them, concern and urgency. Now, I'm quite sure you won't be shocked to hear that there's a global plastic pollution crisis. And whether we mean to or not, our communities, our parks, our schools, we're contributing to the plastic pollution through artificial turf fields. At the same time, the plastic industry is focusing on encouraging recycling and reusing of plastic products. However, less than 10% of plastic is recycled worldwide and only about 5 or 6% in the United States. And as for reusing artificial turf fields, there's not enough need to make any difference. I'm thinking here of batting cages, driving ranges, dog parks, private lawns, mini golf courses, even for secondhand artificial turf fields. And neither can we recycle our way out of the problem. In fact, there was research out of Scotland that suggested that recycling facilities themselves may turn as much as 6 to 13% of the incoming waste into microplastics. Additionally, the recycled products contain more chemicals in higher amounts than found in the original products. Recycling is energy intensive, it's polluting, and the plastic industry itself has stated that making new plastic is cheaper and it's easier than making it out of plastic trash. It's kind of like trying to clean up the bathroom floor due to the overflowing tub, but you're keeping the spigot wide open. As for specifics regarding artificial turf and our environment, it's an indisputable fact that artificial turf gives off carbon dioxide. In a 10-year span, that's over 55 metric tons from a 2-acre field. And arborists report that it takes over 1,800 trees just to offset the carbon dioxide that the field gives off. On the other hand, natural grass is a carbon sink. It provides a net reduction of over 60 metric tons of carbon dioxide over the same period. And there are more effects on the environment to consider. Specifically, artificial turf creates dead zones in the soil. Before installing the synthetic grass, the soil is heavily compacted, it's leveled, and it's eventually covered with that huge plastic blanket. And this process degrades the soil structure. It kills soil bacteria. And those wonderful wiggly worms and insects, they can't exist in this environment. Grass, on the other hand, supports biodiversity. It improves flood control, it reduces erosion, improves our soil. In addition, as just mentioned, grass acts as a carbon sink, and at the same time, grass produces oxygen, and it's remarkably proficient at that. Some studies show that natural grass absorbs sound, improving our quality of life. And finally, natural grass reduces temperature in the surrounding area. So next, let's explore some artificial turf as it relates to temperature. It's just the gift that just keeps on giving. And in this case, it's giving us a gift we don't like at all. It's a heat island. Air becomes hotter, especially at the surface and also at nose height. And the surface temperature of artificial turf ranges between 25 and 55 degrees hotter than natural grass. That's according to the Penn State Center for Sports Surface Research. and we've been feeling it. And the data confirm that the average heat season is getting longer. In fact, studies show that it's about 49 days longer than recorded about 60 years ago, and it continues to increase. Of course, that has a direct impact on the number of safe days for being on artificial turf. The Yale Center on Climate Change and Health reaffirms these findings and indicates the summer heat is going to arrive earlier and it will be more severe. So imagine how that impacts those living in the areas near artificial turf fields. And keep in mind, not every home or apartment dweller near an artificial turf field can afford air conditioning. The bottom line is we're dealing here with a double whammy. We have artificial turf field adding a large heated surface area and increasing the temperature while taking away a cooler one that could be provided by natural grass. There are indications of a variety of health injuries resulting from playing on artificial turf, especially if it's very hot artificial turf. And athletes, of course, are the most impacted, but so are marching bands and cheering squads, our pets, and even our wildlife are at risk. And injuries run the gamut from heat cramps, respiratory difficulties, heat exhaustion, to even heat stroke, which is very serious, can sometimes lead to death. Heat-related blisters, burns, at a minimum, they're uncomfortable, but they're concerning as these are skin injuries that pathogens can exploit. If artificial turf isn't regularly and properly maintained, it provides a favorable environment for bacteria and for viruses to accumulate. Unlike artificial turf, grass absorbs bodily fluids and animal waste that can lead to these types of infections. And when it comes to knee and ankle injuries, there are numerous studies with results skewing in a variety of directions. In a study not connected to the artificial turf industry, the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis found high school football and boys and girls soccer and rugby, they led to a significantly higher risk of lower limb injury to athletes on the artificial turf fields. And as for college athletes, there was a 10-year study by the NCAA that was published in the American Journal of Sports Medicine. They found significant higher injury rates on synthetic turf. In particular, they found that certain ligament tears occurred 3 times as often on artificial turf than on grass. And while our high school athletes are impacted, as just mentioned, younger growing children are also affected by the artificial turf heat and the chemicals and the gases. And for all humans, there are multiple routes of exposure, including inhalation, dermal or skin absorption, and ingestion. However, children are highly vulnerable to the effects of toxic chemicals because they breathe faster than adults, so there's more inhalation exposure. Pediatricians point out that children produce more body heat while sweating less than adults, and children are closer to the ground, and what could be more fun for them than rolling around in the grass? Unfortunately, it's often plastic grass, and it's inevitable that hands are in their mouth or on their face, carrying some of these worrisome chemicals. Dumped, buried, or burned. When I wrote that title, I thought, aside from this slide, it could be the title of a great country western ballad, but disposal has to be part of a thorough artificial turf discussion. An artificial turf field typically has to be replaced every 8, 10, or 12 years, depending on the usage and the environment. And most warranties will cover only 8 years. Used artificial turf field can be disposed of by incineration, by burying it in special wells, or putting it in landfills. In the past, most used artificial turf fields were shipped overseas, but today Many countries, such as China and Malaysia, they're no longer accepting waste containing PFAS for their landfill. And here's a bit of unsettling information from PEER, that's the Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. Because some countries in Europe have found they can't safely manage their PFAS waste due to the tightening regulations for recycling and disposal there. PEER showed documentation that PFAS waste as late as last year was being shipped into the US, where there are fewer regulations and almost no oversight. So, in addition to the ugly piles of discarded plastic grass scattered throughout our landscape, toxic chemicals, microplastics, and gases, they continue to leach into the soil, into our water, into the air. And it's been reported that discarded rolls of artificial turf are also fire hazards. So, like the heat zones we discussed earlier, here again, we have an environmental justice issue. Keep in mind, an average football field filled with the sand and the infill, it can weigh over 200 tons. So it requires some heavy duty machinery to lift it and to move it. And then there's the cost of what to do with it once removed from the field site. These expenses are rarely factored into the overall cost of artificial turf fields. In any case, there's no chain of custody, and there are no regulations and federal levels on turf disposal. And as you can see here, the average removal expense can be significant. So having mentioned costs, let's look at that. So I admit to finding it challenging to make cost comparisons between grass and artificial turf fields. For example, the part of the country where the fields are located matters because of weather and labor and material costs. Is the maintenance and labor in-house or outsourced? Are we comparing a poorly graded, a minimally maintained grass field to a newly installed artificial turf field? How thoroughly, how consistently is the maintenance being done? So you get the drift. This chart comes from fields located in the South. It was done about 5 years ago. So the figures are certainly less than found in today's market, especially here in the Northeast. It's also unclear if the figures dealing with resurfacing includes the removal and disposal costs, as we mentioned earlier. And I should also talk about water here. One of the highly marketed benefits of artificial turf is that it saves water. The statistics about that vary with the turf manufacturers. However, that's not the entire picture. In warm weather locations or on exceedingly hot days, any place, water is often used to cool down a field. And the dirty little secret is that the cooling effect is short-lived, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. Some installations include misters that their literature describes as a way to improve traction and athletic performance. At any rate, I question that $0 entry on the synthetic turf costs. And finally, although I don't have hard data, even the manufacturing process of the artificial turf is water intensive. Regardless, the important takeaway is that considering the full lifetime of the fields, overall artificial turf is more costly. And I said earlier, I rarely use data for marketing material, but this quote from a Texas sport field contractor is worth noting. In their own blog, their experts said, among other things, that a synthetic turf field will always be far more expensive than natural grass. And if it's more impactful to hear from authoritative sources in the Northeast, Harvard University and also the Toxic Use Reduction Institute, TORI, at the University of Massachusetts, both say that natural grass fields in the long run will cost less than artificial turf fields. So as we review the topic overall, it's often unclear what certain terms mean or even how to verify a company's environmental claims. Greenwashing is what this is called. And to be generous, to be open to the artificial turf sales and marketing efforts, stating the absence of certain specific PFAS may sometimes be confused with the absence of all PFAS, and there may or may not be an intention to mislead. However, companies and their marketers can say whatever they like unless there's a lawsuit, for example. And personally, the alarms go off when I hear or read things like, oh, don't worry, it's all going to be recycled. There's no evidence that children are harmed. No studies show fields cause cancer. So the burden is on us. Remember, there is no uniform certification. And as I kind of begin to wind down here, if you're ever asked, when's it likely that the turf debate will enter the courtroom? You should answer now. Reuters, that international newspaper, writes that the courtroom battle of the safety of artificial turf is closer than we think. It even mentioned that defendants could include schools and universities and sports franchises. And the headline of a New York Times article in this May, just past May, told us to expect a flood of forever chemical lawsuits. And sure enough, 1 month later, when I picked up my paper, yes, I still pick up my paper. 1 month later, there's an article about chemical makers suing the EPA, saying they exceeded their authority regarding the PFAS in water. And closer to home, in Westchester County, our neighbors in Rye, regarding a field called Nursery Field on Milton Road there, they have a pending lawsuit. It says the project does not account for the health risks associated with turf fields, flooding issues in the area, and the concerns of local and regional agencies, including environmental groups. And among the defendants are the City of Rye, Rye City Council, and the City Board of Appeals. Whenever there's a discussion about this subject, the vast majority of time, the conversation includes two words: yes, but. Yes, but artificial turf fields can provide more hours of playing time. Yes, but we need more hours of playing time for all our school and community activities. Other schools have artificial turf fields. Why shouldn't we? The anti-turf leaders have highlighted negative data, and it's nonstop use for both our school and our rec programs. It's great. Well, first of all, no one is disputing the importance of exercise and sports for good health, especially for growing children. And most communities would agree that providing more open space for activities would be a wonderful thing. So I suggest that instead of the yes, but comments, two essential questions need to be asked. What can we do to improve our grass fields? And that's really part of the conversation. So stay tuned for Dr. Rogers. And really, are we really willing to ignore science and research and the advice of physicians? So I end by offering you something to think about. To date, there have been no long-term studies by any academic, government, or medical entity not subsidized by the artificial turf or plastic industry that can unconditionally state artificial turf fields are safe. Dr. Kyla Bennett, who's the director of social science policy at PEER, said that it's only a matter of time before artificial turf is banned. And time is a good teacher. We need only to recall the history of tobacco, Agent Orange, and asbestos to remind us that confirming harm is very challenging and it can take a long time. So in a few years, I believe we will, or we should be asking, how on earth did we ever allow this to happen? And with that, I thank you. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Rogers.
Wow, Susan, thank you so much. That was amazing and incredibly informative. If folks have questions, please put them in the chat. I'd love to bring, what is Dr. Rogers is putting up his presentation. So let me just tell you a little bit about him. He's a professor of turf grass research in the Department of Plant, Soil, and Microbial Sciences at Michigan State University. His current research includes performance turf renovations, turf grass establishment, and soil modification. He is a key grass consultant for the 16 venues in the 2026 FIFA World Cup soccer tournament. He was also part of the planning, designing, and building of the new grass track at Churchill Downs. Before that, Dr. Rogers was a consultant and project leader for the 2008 and 2004 Summer Olympic Games. So thank you so much, Susan, for that great presentation. Dr. Rogers, I will give you the floor. Thank you so much.
Okay, Terry, Susan, everyone can hear me, I hope. Yep, thumbs up. So I appreciate that talk, Susan. I'm going to come at you a little bit differently and just more of a turf grass guy. I've never been an artificial turf person. I've been asked to research it, refused vehemently, maybe to my detriment, but at the same time, I've always been very interested in technology and how it was going to help turf grass. And, part of that comes from the idea of this right here is the high school athletic field. And I got really into this in the 2000s because my children were all going through high school sports at that time. And prior to that, I'd been doing Olympics and I'd been doing World Cup things. So it was very much of a 35,000-foot view of sports turf. But as I got down closer and closer to the ground, one of the things that struck me is that, it's football, it's lacrosse, it's soccer, it's cheerleading, it's a church. The high school football field is a church. It is where everyone gathers. It's a community gathering place. A Friday night is almost an experience that you don't want to miss. And so this field is extremely important. And it's not just, it's the cheerleaders, it's the band, it's everyone has these memories around this. So if this is going to be what we are striving to, spend a lot of time at, I think the idea behind this safety is important. Now, one of the things that you're going to hear me say some terms, and that most of the time athletic fields are built out of what's called native soil. And that means that's the soil that might be in your front yard. And it's high in silt and clay. And when it's dry, it's pretty stable, it's pretty good. Its disadvantage is it doesn't have a high infiltration rate. In other words, if you're going to get an inch rain, you're going to have a problem. And when you have those saturated conditions and you don't have proper drainage, you can have a football field that looks just like the bottom of this picture. And that doesn't help anybody. It's not safe to play on. No one really likes it. The field's going to get ruined. And this is the high school field where my son and my daughters all participated. And this was what it was on October the 28th, 2006. That's me taking that picture from the stands. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, here's the problem. I'm going to get a phone call tomorrow, and I'm going to get them from all over the state of Michigan because they've still got a month of football left, and they're going to want to know how they can fix that field right there. And I'm going to tell them I have no idea because we don't have any growing time left. It's October, it's Michigan, the growing season is over with. So what are we going to do? Well, that doesn't stop people from asking that question, and that I can't really repair that because now it's November, and Connecticut's no different than Michigan. And I can tell you the natives will get restless and stuff like that. So if you're me, you're sitting there staring at this going, we've got to figure out a way to make this a little bit better. Now you say, what are the solutions? Well, here's one, and the price is way up. I can 2006. Don't ignore the price, but that's one of the solutions, and of course that's an easy out for a whole lot of people. Now, I much more would be saying, well, why don't we build a natural turf athletic field? And that's when you start bringing in the idea of can you build something what's called a sand-based field? Now, this means it's primarily made of sand materials. that can maintain stability during periods of heavy use, and they can have rapid infiltration rates. And so that means they can take a rain. So if we can build these types of fields. Now, I don't think we could ever have anything built in sand. We've been building putting greens in sand since 1960. Okay, so we know how to build things out of sand. That's become a very, very common method of how you build an athletic field or a putting green or any other high traffic or high performance use. So it really comes down to what kind of sand-based field are. There's different types. Well, here's what's called a conventional sand-based field. And I think Susan might have been alluding to that a little bit. And that's where it has a gravel layer underneath it, and it's built more like an athletic field. And this thing can range in price from $400,000 to $800,000, and it can be very expensive. And for me, for a lot of schools, I learned very quickly. They'd say, well, it doesn't matter to me if it's when you get up to that high, 400 or 500 or $600,000, you might as well be talking 6 million because we can't afford it. So I was listening to that. I heard him say that, and I said, okay, there's got to be other things. Well, we can take all the drainage out of that. We can take the gravel layer out. We know that we can do this with 6 inches of sand, and we can cut the price down to about half of that. And it's called a sand cap system, and it's been used all over the world and still used today, and people use it. It involves having drain tile. And so that's another way to do it. But the problem with doing something like that is the field's out of use. And it's always somebody's senior year. And if you've ever had anybody go in and seed a field in the middle of June with the idea that it's going to be ready in August or in May and ready in August, that's a lot of pressure. And if you have a failure, that's somebody's senior year that got ruined. So there's a lot of pressure on something like this. So I was trying to take this out of the equation with this particular research. So there's an alternative renovation process where you can put in intercept drain tile installation, which is just sand drain tile. And then what would happen if we built up the sand cap system through cumulative top dressing? In other words, go in there over a summertime and just add top dressing. And by that, I can show you a few schematics here where you would go in and you would cut drain tiles or cut holes, cut long slits, fill them with bang tile, backfill that with sand. So now you've got a place for the water to go and a place for the water to drain. Then over time, after you seed the grass, you slowly add up top dressing to where all of a sudden you've added enough sand to where that's no longer that's a sand-based field. It's called a sand cap buildup instead of the sand cap I showed you earlier. And it's not anything that's new. People have been using sand top dressing for 150 years. And I've always said this my whole life. There's very few new ideas. What's really new is the technology. So where's the technology? The technology comes in this film that I'll show you. These new machines that can apply sand evenly and quickly, they're available. And you say, well, we don't own one. You don't have to own one. You can contract this service out. And this sand is what provides us the ability to have a good playing surface. The other thing that's become very available is these drain installation systems. So if you combine the fact that I can sand top dress very easily with the fact that I can install drains, I now have the ability to say, we should be able to go into that local field, install these drains, start that top dressing, and maybe never take the field out of play. Just simply bring that field from a field that probably didn't put up very many games in a particular season to where we could renovate it to where it would be able to put up with several more games during a season. And I'll show you some of the case studies here in a minute. So here's that change in price. So all of a sudden I go from synthetic fields all the way down to a built-up sand cap system that's a fifth of what a synthetic field would be. There's a breakdown of it, putting in an irrigation system, drain tile spacing, sand top dressing. Now, here was the thing, here was the research that was done by my graduate student, Alec Kovaleski, who's now a professor at Oregon State University. And I challenged Alec with this because I said, Alec, you want to get a PhD? I've got some questions for you to answer. And I know you're very interested in athletic fields. So first question I'd say is, how much sand could you put down at once? Because I don't want to kill the grass, but I want to be able to apply quite a bit of sand during a very short period of time. When is that? During that 10 or 11, 12-week period between the time school is over and the time it starts again. And we were able to quickly pick out that, while you can't put much down on a putting green at once because you'll kill the grass, because you're mowing Kentucky bluegrass at about an inch or an inch and a half, you can add quite a bit. And how many annual top dressings can be made? Well, it took that to make 3 inches in 30 years at a golf course. I could do 3 inches in 3 years on an athletic field. So the ability to rapidly add this top dressing is not far-fetched by any stretch of the imagination. Now, the other question that was very big was, could we use the field throughout the top dressing process? In other words, the whole time we're rebuilding this, can they come in and practice? Can they come in and play 7-on-7? Can they do whatever they want to do? And the answer is you can do it. It'd be better if you didn't that first year. Certainly the next year and the third year and the fourth year after that, you can do everything you want to. But if you could leave off the first summer, just the first summer, be pretty good. And the final question was, how far apart did I really have to make these drain tiles? Because the person who's selling you the drain tile wants you to have it 6 foot apart. But that costs more money than 13 or 20 feet apart. So Alec did a study where he looked at it in all these different spacings. And when we were finally done, we put him in these 3 experiments. And I won't bore you with going over all the results from them. I've summarized it down to 1 page. If we can add up a 1/2 inch, you can build a 1/2 inch up over a 5-week period. That's going to give you a benefit way beyond anything that a native soil would do. You got to back off if we're going to do it during the summer. You shouldn't have any traffic that first summer. If you're pinched for pennies, drain tile spacing at 13 feet was just as effective as drain tile spacing at 6 feet once we got to a 1 inch worth of top dressing. And then once we got the 2 inches worth of top dressing, hell, you could have 20-foot spacing and it would be as good as 13 or 6. So you can see that there's been work done that you can share. This is all in journal articles and extension bulletins, because we've printed this up and you can put this anywhere you want to go. And now all of a sudden, there's how we get to our number. The old recommendations are 250,000. I would tell you with the new recommendations, we cut that 250 down to 120. I've sent this specification, this recommendation all over the world to people of how to build up sand cap fields. Now you might say, why is this old man telling us all this? I'm telling you this because there are ways that you can go out there and build these fields and so that they will last. Here's a case study. Of course, that's very important. The best one was this one in Grand Blanc. This guy was a young, good guy, and he called me and he said, I hear you doing this work. We'd like to be the test field. I said, all right, well, come on, let's go and we'll do it and we'll put it in and we'll build up this sand cap and we'll go 6 inches. And that's what we looked like after the first year. And I can remember looking at that field and I thought, well, God almighty, my idea is the worst one ever because that field stinks. And I walked out there on that field and I said to the guy, to the guy that was actually doing the top dressing, I said, how much sand did you put on this field? He said, oh, I put a couple of inches. I said, really? It looks to me like you just put some out right the day before I got here. He said, no, I put a couple of inches out here. I said, well, do me a favor, go down to the end zone where there's no traffic at all and pull me a sample. And he did. And that's all we had. And that's no sand at all. And I said, you're telling me a story. And of course, he got fired. And all of a sudden, they did do it correctly. And once they did do it correctly, by the time we got to 2009, 2 years later, that's how much sand had been built up. And all of a sudden, that field could be used for as many events as they wanted to. Now, people always ask me, I say, yeah, but that's what it looks like year one. What's it look like later on? So I went back at year 9 to the same field. I said, looks pretty good. Are you still using the field? He said, well, we built up about 5 inches of top dressing now. Yeah, but how many games are you really playing on these? He said, well, I'm going to write that out for you. 18 high school football games, 16 youth football games, 30 practices, 36 band practices, and 30 lacrosse games in the spring. I said, I consider that a success. And it was all about making sure you were sand top dressed and fertilized and did the work. This is a practice field that was actually very, very undulating. And what this allows you to do is when you bring this top dressing in and build it to a slope, as long as you put these drain tiles in, all of a sudden you can have a very nice field for very, very little money and very little inputs that will perform much better. And this is the practice football field on November 8th. I've never seen more grass on the field in November than there. Okemos High School, Okemos football did the same thing. This is at the end of the season. You can see after all these games, the amount of grass that's still on this field is fairly impressive. Now, one of the questions I always get asked is, what if I just top dressed, and I didn't put any drainage in? Wouldn't that help the middle of the field? Yes, it would. But that water's got to go somewhere. And when that water starts traveling through that sand laterally and cannot go infiltrate into the soil, because that soil is not going to take it, and there's no drain line to take that soil, it goes right to the standing water in the sidelines. So that's one of the reasons why you can't just say, I'm just going to build up sand top dressing and eschew the idea of the drain lines. Now, this is not all the work that we've done. Second thing I would share with you is that we've had a lot of people ask us about, can you quantify what practices, cultural practices do for athletic fields? And this great question was posed to me by a superintendent of schools locally where I was here in East Lansing, Michigan, and I'm walking the fields, and he said, our fields stink. And I said, yeah, well, if you mowed them more often, if you mowed them more than once a week, you'd get more games. And he said, yeah, but what exactly does that mean? What does more games mean, and how do you know it would get better? I said, you're right. We have to quantify this. So that's the question people love to ask me, is how many games can I expect out of my field? And I say, well, here's the inputs you have to have. So you have to have inputs on your field. And the way we monitor fields is we use traffic simulators. You always say, well, do you really actually put traffic on your fields? I say, yeah, we put traffic on our fields. We might put more traffic on our fields than a game would, because we want to see what kind of machine. So there have been machines that have been developed to put this kind of traffic on here. So when you put this traffic on, now look at this chart. This is on the left side is plants. That's basically telling you the density, how many plants there are per 100 square centimeters, which is a 4-inch plug. And on the right side, you can see that there's 2 basic treatments where I don't mow very often. I don't have very good fertility. And in the blue bars where I mow it correctly, often, and I have the right amount of fertility. And you can see very clearly as I start putting the traffic on, I have more grass. And if I have more grass by mowing and fertilizing correctly, I am going to play more games. There is no way around that. And this has been shown time and time again. Now, this does not stop, this is my last thing to share with you. This does not stop the number one problem with athletic fields, and that is mowing. How well do I mow? You saw that last slide there where by mowing twice a week, I could have 30, 35, 40 plants more in that 4 square centimeters by just mowing, increasing my mowing frequency. But oftentimes people tell me that's the most difficult thing for us to do, is get a butt to go in a seat and mow the athletic fields. I don't have time, they say. I've got other things to got to do, they say. Well, that is changing, folks. That excuse for me is going right out the door. Why? Robotic mowing. Now, this is the first robotic mower I saw in 1997, so please don't let me think that I have never thought about this. First time I saw this robotic mower in 1997, I thought that could change athletic fields forever. I've seen a few come through. Some of them are pretty good ideas. Some of them weren't so good. And they've got all shapes and sizes, but right now they're coming on like a freight train because they have become, they're very good. They don't need any wires built into the ground. They can mow on patterns. They can mow at night. They're safe. They stop when anybody's around. And if you've ever thought about it, the athletic field, because it doesn't have anything in front of it, anything on it, might be the best place ever for a robotic mower. They mow with these razor blades and that are on the bottom there. And now you have golf courses that are buying them by the fleet. This is Philadelphia Cricket Club that bought 40 of these robotic mowers. Another golf course in Michigan bought 37 to mow their whole rough, to mow 40 acres, because these things can mow 2.5 acres in a day. Yes, that means they could mow an athletic field 6 to 7 times a week. And if the density improves with each time you mow the field, and the improved density gives you better turf quality, which leads to more games, it does not take a rocket scientist to make you realize that this is a way to really combat this issue. This is a picture of mowing Barton Hills, and so we don't even have hills in athletic fields. So the simplicity here is going to be very good. You say there's only one mower? Hell no, there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of mowers. They're fighting over your business right now. And they're coming on like a freight train, and they're within 2 years, there'll even be more of them. And they have ones that are 5 gang that are going to be starting to mow on athletics or mow on golf courses. Autonomous mowing is here to stay, and it is going to do nothing but benefit the athletic field. And this is that final plant right here. And that's my final slide. So I thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much. That was great. That was so interesting. So I have a question because I have a couple people that have asked this already, and I see that we have some Q&A, but let me ask this question first. So Dr. Rogers, are you aware of anyone that has removed an artificial turf field and replaced it with a grass field like this?
Artificial fields, I have not seen that done necessarily. I have seen certainly grass fields go to artificial, but I haven't seen the other way around. Where
Susan, have you seen any of that at all?
I'm sorry, I have not, but I
So
just know that from all the equipment that it takes to remove an artificial turf field, it's not so easy. And there's labor charges and expenses for hauling those, tons and tons of field away.
Yeah, and so my answer to that would be yes. It would be expensive. Probably no less expensive than it would be to replace a artificial turf. But I guess what I'm trying to share with you here is one of the arguments that has been very easy for school systems to put up is it takes too much to maintain it. I can't get a butt in the seat. The robotics is changing all that. It's changing all that dramatically, quickly, swiftly, and that is a train you can jump on in a hurry and really have tremendous success.
that's so great. I mean, I can think of a couple towns off the top of my head that put in artificial turf, 10, 12 years ago that if, maybe at this point looking to, do they need to replace it? And so we start having that conversation of saying, if you're going to pull it up and replace it, let's talk about doing this instead.
And I will tell you that my I can't remember, either the second or third PhD student, Jason Henderson, who actually played football for Penn State and is now a turfgrass professor at the University of Connecticut. He has some tremendous robotic research going that I want you should tap into him because he's got great data.
And he's at UConn?
He is.
Oh, that's great. All right. We'll
Yep.
have to make sure we reach out. So
Absolutely. Yep. He loves it. He loves you to contact him. So please
I
do.
surely will. For Susan, Myra wants to know, how would you rank the artificial turf infills in terms of safety? And actually, I was also wondering, how much does it cost to replace that lost infill each year?
The second question, the cost, I don't have a clue because number one, it depends on what infill it is that you're replacing.
Okay, fair.
But as far as Myra's question, that's really difficult to create a clear hierarchy among all the infills because there are many unanswered questions due in part to proprietary information. But that being said, I would certainly put crumb rubber at the low end of the scale. However, there are really legitimate concerns for all of them. As I mentioned in the PowerPoint, there's apprehension about the growing and the production methods and the lack of chain of custody. In fact, a study published just yesterday that I read, it's in a journal called Environmental Health Perspectives. It revealed that 14% of all U.S. pesticide ingredients are PFAS. And I would be concerned that those pesticides may be used in growing some of the crops incorporated in that organic infill. And it's also important to keep in mind that along with the infill, all the other components in that turf field, including the grass blades, contain chemicals of concern and pose a health risk. So likewise, from a heat exposure standpoint, all synthetic turf fields reach higher temperatures regardless of the infill type. So I'm sorry I didn't create a beautiful ladder with names for each rung, but it's tough to do that.
So yes, and to your point about the forever chemicals, Anthony was saying PFAS has now been found in the human blood and has also been found in all 50 states. Now, I will say in Connecticut, we just passed a ban on PFAS in products, although I don't know if artificial turf was in that list. I don't think it was actually. In fact, I'm pretty
No,
sure
it was not.
but it was passed. But at least the knowledge of the dangers of PFAS is increasing in our state. The PFAS bill that we just passed was passed unanimously and bipartisanly, which is unusual in Connecticut. So, so the awareness has been rising. Ali wanted to know, what do you tell proponents of synthetic turf who say that it's safe because it's been in existence for over 50 years?
Well, an assessment of safety depends on gathering relevant data, not on the number of years something's been in use. There continued to be open questions where researchers say that more studies needed, but there are definitely other areas where there is great certainty about harm. So I don't think it's the number of years. I think it's the quantity of information that we have. And interesting, regarding human safety, I read some literature that cites concerns about possible chronic health effects in children and adults who play on artificial turf. These are effects that aren't explained by genetics. So to date, there's not been any good, systematic, well-designed epidemiological studies. But there are experts who are saying that this strongly suggests the possibility of environmental chemical exposure. And given what we know about the chemical composition of artificial turf, it's a contribution that shouldn't be ruled out.
Let me take a swing at this, and I'm going to tell you a different way to hold on here. I mean, a different way to swing at this, because what is the you ask the athlete, okay? When you ask an athlete, which would they rather play on? And overwhelmingly, they say natural turf. And then you say why. And part of them, they don't really talk about injuries. What they talk about is recovery time. They talk about how long it takes them to recover from playing on artificial turf versus natural turf. So then you have all the ways that we can measure this. And we have been doing, we haven't put a lot of effort into finding different ways to measure this until recently. And part of the project that we're doing I'm participating with in the World Cup, FIFA has funded some very nice work. And I think you'll very quickly see a machine that comes out that can actually measure finally very accurately the differences between artificial and natural turf, to where you'll see it on a chart as to the deformation, the difference in the stopping time, the hardness. Because up till now, we've had a machine called a Clegg, and the Clegg could drop on an artificial and a natural turf, and it could get the same number. So everybody would say, well, it's the same. But the athlete would run on both fields and say, I hate this one. Well, this new machine that's coming out of the FIFA research is going to, I think it's going to change things dramatically. It's called an F-Lex. Those of you that like World Cup and like to read about it, keep your eyes on that, and you'll see that it's coming fast.
And just to add on to what you say, Dr. Rogers, I read that the NFL Players Association, they did a study, and that 69% of their players preferred natural grass. I think the whole thing came to a head when, was it Aaron Rodgers got that injury? And that prompted the National Football Players Association to call for grass fields everywhere, which
Yeah, they're very much excited about our work. And so that we're doing for the World Cup, they're watching it very closely. But what's more important to me is this machine that can measure this and really begin to show the differences. And we hadn't had it. We hadn't had that up till now. And so you weren't able to basically, the child tells you it has a cold and you couldn't see the symptoms. So now we'll be able to do this. And so I think that'd be a good contribution from this.
Yeah, that sounds like it's
that
going to
FIFA
be
has sponsored. Yes.
really great data to have.
Right.
And a couple people in the Q&A have said that University of Arkansas, the Baltimore Ravens, and the University of Mississippi have changed from synthetic turf.
Oh yeah. I took
Grass.
that question to mean high school.
You know what? And honestly, so did I. And so for those of you who are wondering, who want to go back to your town about this, be aware that probably the University of Arkansas and the colleges are going to have much higher requirements. The high schools probably don't need as much.
Well, they have to go in and rebuild it inside of a 75,000 seat stadium. And
Right.
Michigan State switched from artificial to natural turf since I've been there. So yes, but I thought the question was high school. And so I apologize.
Right. No, and I mean, honestly, I think especially for our state, I think a lot of people are concerned because they are going in town after town after town and have been for a while. And so now if we can have an opportunity to prevent more from going in, but also as people are saying like, oh, well, now it's time to replace, sort of begin to have get them to just switch back to natural grass. So it's great that we've got some larger
I know that I've sent
organizations already doing it.
I know I sent Susan all the articles, and so she has those that she could send out to people. Or if you send me an email at rogersj.msu.edu, rogersj@msu.edu, I'll send you something as well. So it's just ammunition for you to have.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Diane wanted to know if there are even more details comparing the cost of design, installation, and maintenance for a typical high school football field between grass and artificial turf.
I would tell you that a very, very good website for that is called sportsfieldmanagersassociation.org, sfma.org. And they've done a very nice job of detailing those costs for exactly that reason.
Great, thank you. So, someone wanted to know, Elizabeth was wondering, she said, I've heard there is concern over the chemicals used to disinfect the artificial turf that is possibly required for annual maintenance. Is it true that we have to use antimicrobial chemicals? Do you know anything about the cleaning of this? Maybe Susan?
In the artificial turf, they're supposed to, because otherwise it builds up the microbes, and that's when we get the skin infections that I talked about earlier with open wounds. And so they have to be sprayed with antimicrobials for fungus and things like that. And also static guard has to be considered for the plastic blades.
Are there examples of the sand topping and robotic mowing athletic fields near Connecticut? Do we have any of those near to us?
On the athletic fields, I don't have specific examples. I saw just last week, I was at a couple of golf courses that are using the robotic mowers in right on the Connecticut New York line. And
Okay.
you know, it's just a matter of time, because the turf grass people see this, and you know, the biggest skeptics in the world are golf course superintendents, and they bought this thing hook, line, and sinker. So it is coming like a freight train. It's coming faster than I ever thought it would. So
How much do the robotic mowers cost?
that big one that I showed you cost about 35,000, and I've
Okay.
seen them as small as 5,000. So
Okay.
they're not cheap, but they don't take breaks.
No, they should have. How much
They
do
don't need
so
insurance.
how many of those would you need to do a high school football
Two,
field? Two?
two. Oh, for one high school football field, one,
One.
one.
And you could mow multiple times a week with that?
I would, if you couldn't mow it 6 times a week, something's wrong. It's because you forgot to, it plugs in itself. These things are pretty impressive.
Oh, so they're electric.
They're electric.
Oh, awesome.
They go to their own charging station when they're about 15 minutes from being down. This work is very impressive.
And
Very impressive.
how do they program them to
Somebody has to program them at the beginning.
Okay.
And then once they're programmed and they know where their boundaries are, they go and they can make any stripe that you want. They can go north, south, they can go east, west, they can go on a diagonal. And again, when they get to about 15 minutes left in their charge, they know to go to their charging station and plug in. And when they're fully charged, they come back out.
That's amazing.
It,
So
it's
you
very
don't even have
impressive.
to
And
monitor them.
yeah, it's very impressive. You want to keep your eye on this, because this is, like I said, this is a game changer.
That's amazing. And someone actually had another question for you, Dr. Rogers. Have you ever dealt with a field that had contaminated soil that needed to be replaced? And if so,
Yes.
what is the best remedy to replace the contaminated soil to continue use of the
Well,
field?
so what happens there is, that's the beauty of the sand, is you remove it to a level, then you put a liner in, and on top of those liners you put your drain tile, and then you backfill with sand, and then the contamination has been remitted away from the field that you're actually playing on. So this has been done on golf courses and athletic fields. I've been involved in at least 2 baseball fields that have been built on top of city dumps. So that's not a problem. That's where the liner plays the role. And that's why using sand base, because the sand's always brought in from a quarry anyway, and then we establish the turf in the sand.
And how often do you have to keep putting the sand down?
It's probably an annual thing, once a year.
Okay.
You add about 1/4 of an inch at a time, which is about 80 tons of sand.
Wow.
which seems like a lot, but it's really not.
Right. No,
It could be 80 tons could be applied with one of those top dressers in a morning, in a single morning. So
okay. Wow. Someone anonymous has a question for you, Dr. Rogers, and this might be just a guess, but what are the odds a school district like Greenwich would make the switch to natural grass?
well, I I like to think that they're pretty good, or I wouldn't be standing here right now talking to you.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean honestly, if I didn't think we had a chance, I wouldn't be doing this work, wouldn't be doing this research, wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be home watching one of my grandkids run around. So no, I like to think that you if you get organized enough that you can do this and things are on your side and again, you got the robotics, you got a way to all of a sudden you got a way to do it without it costing an arm and a leg. And all of a sudden you now have some data with this new machine that's coming out. It's called a FLEX, small f, capital LEX. Keep your eye on this, coming out of the University of Tennessee and my first graduate PhD, second PhD graduate student. But keep an eye on them because that machine is a breakthrough. It is a real breakthrough. We have one up at Michigan State and we've been using it for our World Cup research, and I'm very, very impressed at its potential right now.
That's awesome. Diane, in our Q&A, just wanted to let everyone know that the California Department of Toxic Substances Control will be holding a webinar on August 27th on PFAS and chemical groups of concern in synthetic turf. So, Diane, if you want to email me that information, I can include it in my follow-up. And just as I'm going through these, I will follow up. This webinar will be on our website. You can send it out to folks that you think need to see it, like your decision makers in your town officials, your school coaches, anyone who's really got a lot of input into the fields, the maintenance folks, Parks and Rec. So Elizabeth has a question for Dr. Rogers. We get a lot of intense rain flow in Connecticut with climate change. Is there any data that compares rain day stoppages between artificial turf and the engineered grass fields?
Well, the engineered grass fields are built to where they will take those 2 and 3 inch rains. And that was part of the challenge that I gave to Alec Kovaleski, the PhD student. I said, make sure that you have the data that shows once I've got a sand, if I build that sand cap up by an inch or an inch and a half, simulate a 3 inch rain at 4 o'clock on Friday night. And by 7 o'clock, we're playing.
Wow.
Okay, so they're built to take that kind of rain. That's what they're built for.
That's very cool. Kathy was saying if adjusted for inflation, the cost difference between synthetic turf and grass is even more. As their original cost comparison notes, and renovating with new synthetic turf would have cost about as much as going back to grass.
Yeah, I don't make any claims that my figures are anywhere close to correct in the year 2024 by any stretch. But
I think,
for sure,
I think the point,
things are going up. Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the point is that like, and I think this is Kathy, if you want to jump in and correct me, but I think the natural grass is cheaper, and even if you're replacing it, even if you're taking synthetic turf out and replacing it, you've got that cost of removing the artificial turf and putting in the natural grass. It's even if it's equivalent, you don't the costs ongoing are so much lower with natural grass that's
no question.
Obviously
There's no question about that. She's exactly right.
So so if someone wants to know, is Turf Grass Producers International active in this area?
Yes. Yes. TPI has that's the sod producers. So basically, do you have a sod farm in the area? Probably the closest one is a sod farm called Delia.
Okay.
DELEA, Delia. And so there are several really, really good sod farms in that area.
Hmm.
Lots of exciting things. Lots of exciting things happening with sod right now because there have, this just got passed. They passed the turf gracers, the sod producers, turf grass producers, passed a checkoff system similar to corn, soybeans. So now every square foot of sod that gets sold across America, a certain small percentage goes into a pot for turf grass research.
Oh,
We have never had anything close to that. This could produce millions of dollars for turf grass research. This is one of the great things that the Turf Grass Producers International um, fought for up on Congress and got it passed. And it's just been very recent. So again, that's going to do nothing but help people like Susan as you're going down this road, because we're going to continue to have more and more people doing this work. People like Jason Henderson. I'll be gumming my food somewhere, but I'll be watching. So I'm about to, it won't be me, but it'll be somebody.
well, we're grateful for you for leading the way, for sure. It sounds like you have been trumpeting this cause for quite some time and really pushing the research forward, so that's amazing.
It's been a
Myra
labor
wanted to
of
know,
love.
are pesticides and fertilizers required for these natural grass fields?
It's very difficult to have a field that you can't have. You have to have fertilizer. Okay, you have to have the grass recover. Now, there's different kinds of fertilizers, but we have to have nitrogen. And somebody says, well, I want an organic fertilizer. Well, organic fertilizer has nitrogen as well. Okay, so everything has a nitrogen component to it. So now the pesticide, interestingly enough, the easiest way to keep from using pesticides is to have a nice, dense, healthy turf. The way to have a nice, dense, healthy turf is to have your mowing frequency be high enough. So I say, let's go back to Exhibit A, the robotic mower. So it all goes back to a healthy turf and these cultural practices: mowing, irrigating, fertilizing. Pesticides, it can be done without them. It's difficult, but you just have to have higher inputs. So that's getting onto a brand new subject for me right there.
We're into another webinar. Carrie wanted to know, do grass fields need to be rested, or if they're managed properly, can they withstand constant play?
Yes, they can withstand constant play. In other words, could they be used every day? Sure. But would they benefit from the fact that if they got 2 or 3 days off a week? They would, just like anything. It's just like anything. If I said, let's run 5 miles every day, and you say, well, let's take Sunday off. Well, I sure feel a hell of a lot better after taking that one day off. That's the same thing with the grass field. It can do it, but it benefits from having some time off as well.
Sure, that makes sense. Laura wanted to know, does grass grown in a top field have deeper, healthier roots than grass on a non-top filled field?
No, I can have grass in sand-based fields that can be all the way down 10, 12 inches. So no, it is a function of the maintenance.
And Fern wanted to know, is there irrigation in the turf grass field?
Yes, always.
Always.
I cannot grow high performance grass without irrigation.
Okay. Do you recommend seed or sod?
I recommend seed, only because when I'm dealing with sod, I have to match the soil types. Again, that's another lecture.
All right. Yeah, I think we've
You're going to get a lot of these. That you open up. I always know these things open up lots of cans of worms. So
no, this is great. I mean, thank you so much. Let me check in the no, everyone kept all their questions in the Q&A instead of like sometimes I go back and forth. So are there any other, so some people we've answered some of the same questions.
right.
So I don't want to necessarily repeat them. Any other questions that folks have? We're
Again, you
almost,
can,
we're about at time actually, so.
okay, and you can
But
send a question to my email and I'm happy to answer it. So, or send you information.
well, yeah, and I don't see any more questions coming in. I just want to honestly thank both of you for your presentations. Thank you so much. I think they're both incredibly helpful. I think it's really important for folks to know, especially like I said, the decision makers in the towns, the influential people that are going to be looking at this, to know the dangers of the artificial turf, what we're actually asking our players to deal with, what we're actually doing to our environment. But then also, it's honestly so inspiring to know about all the possibilities and the success stories and the much lower costs of natural grass fields. And it's really
But
amazing that we've got one of your proteges here in Connecticut. So
you
that's
certainly
really
do.
fantastic.
And I will say that the true champion of this is Susan Rudolph, because she is the one who called me, sought me out, and asked me to do this. And I thank you for that, Susan. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you very
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. I've learned a
Honestly,
lot
thank
from
you
you.
both.
much. Bye bye.
Everyone, have a great night.
Thank you.
And we will, thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I will have this up on our website hopefully soon.